Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Fablemans. This is Steven Spielberg's, semi-autobiographical film about him growing up with his parents divorce, learning about filmmaking, kind of growing up through seeing it, beginning with seeing his first movie. Film kind of ends with two basically getting into the studio system. And I really like reading Hollywood history and the story of filmmakers and the autobiography or legend of certain filmmakers. And Spielberg's one of them. I find his background really fascinating. And so I was very pre-sold on this movie. I was excited. I'm like, this is going to be cool. And what I got is not that and not as good as reading about it or seeing the HBO documentary that came out. I don't know how many years ago, but it came out sort of recently, and neither of them, and I thought that could have been better too, but this doesn't really get into the meat of it, and the decisions he makes that are different from it are interesting and telling about him personally. It makes me feel weird sort of thinking about them because I feel weird making a video basically discussing someone's relationship with their parents, but that's what this film sort of does and is. I mean, and you could say if I separate that from it, but if I just separate what I know and remove my whole context and not have a perspective and an opinion and stuff, I guess, in that case, sure. But in that case, I still don't think this film works because Spielberg himself is a very structured guy, or at least understands the flow of the film. If it isn't actually structured, it feels structured enough that you believe it's structured, and it feels like there's a rhyme and rhythm to the flow and everything like that. He feels very precise. This film is not like that. It sort of reminds me in a way like Spike Lee's Crooklyn, but in that film's case, it felt like the point was to be like that, and in this, it just feels like he doesn't. I don't think Steven Spielberg could make Spike Lee's Crooklyn. Because I don't think this is as good as that. Knowing what we know about his background and seeing the choices he makes us feel weird, and why he chose to admit certain things and dwell on other things puts you in this really strange situation with him and this film that I didn't really enjoy, and I'm very curious. I know he doesn't do audio commentaries, ever, but if he were ever to do one, I would probably want this one because I'm honestly confused, what's going on here? This is very weird, especially when you have a really compelling real-life story of your life, and you make this movie, which is, I think, directorially a huge step down for him, and probably one of the films of his that I was anticipating and thought there's no way you can fuck this up, and what happened, man? Now I will get into spoilers with this. Some of this are not real spoilers, but I did want to fully talk about the film, so if you did want to see it, just know I have a very mixed reaction. There are a few things I did like Judd Hirsch in it. I did like Gabrielle LaBelle as kind of the Spielberg kid. I sort of like the Spielberg people who played the Spielberg person or whatever, Fableman or whatever the fuck. Sammy's Fableman, I guess. Paul Dano, I think both Paul Dano and Michelle Williams have very odd performances. Michelle Williams felt sort of off, but felt like that was the point, but didn't feel like that was off in a way that it just I don't know what. Sometimes that performance was odd. Seth Rogen, you kind of forget he's in this. I don't think, I still think his best dramatic role, I guess, was Jobs, or Steve Jobs, or whatever the one he was in of those. And he was good as Wozniak, but in this, I just don't think, he doesn't really have enough time. I did get enough that he was the charming, fun guy, and he did what he was supposed to do, but it wasn't amazing. And Paul Dano maybe was the best one and kind of conveyed his father the best way you could say, or the patriarchal Fableman, I guess. I did like Judd Hirsch, though. I thought Judd Hirsch was really good. I know he's just being Judd Hirsch, but it's one of the best being Judd Hirsches he's done in a long time, I don't think I've seen him in anything since Independence Day 2, so it was better than that, certainly, but I quite like Judd Hirsch, and obviously the cameo, which I guess I'll get into later, I thought was good, but very showy and all that stuff. So I will get into spoilers now, but if you watch this far, thank you for watching and all that stuff. So if you've watched my Movie Crap Lives, and I think I've discussed this in other places, the story of Steven Spielberg's parents' divorce is actually one that shaped, some of the most biggest pieces of cinema of all time. And so it's kind of one of those things where, like, I do not like to talking about someone's personal life, but it actually is kind of fascinating in his filmography and his portrayal, particularly of fathers, throughout that, what happened changed that. So in real life, basically, and this is what influences why I feel about this movie, to explain. I'm not just like doing this to show I know things. And this is in the Spielberg HBO documentary. It's in biographies. It is in various places. Some of the details are a little sketchy, but you can kind of piece together what happened, the timeline basically. So Steven Spielberg's parents got divorced. When he was a kid, he blamed his father. He saw his father just crying at the breakfast table one day and kept calling him a crybaby. The scene in Close Encounters where the kid is calling Richard Dreyfuss a crybaby is a direct reference to Steven Spielberg's childhood. It's another film I believe he helped write. So that's in there. He's put these autobiographical things in there. And he lost a lot of respect for his father. You can tell the father situations in both Close Encounters and E.T. The father in Close Encounters is not mentally stable. Obviously, he has a huge fight with his wife, Terry Garr, and abandons the family in an E.T. The dad's never there at all. He's just not in it. And those decisions were made because he believed his father left his mother, and his mother, wrecked and destroyed, turned to their family friend Bernie for like compassion and so forth, and then they fell in love through that. And Steven Spielberg didn't talk to his father, didn't respect his father after that. And then years later, post E.T., post Close Encounters, or so we're told, his wife, who I believe is Kate Capshaw who did this, that part is a little confusing, asked him to reconnect with his father, or at least I guess he hadn't seen him or something, and then sees him and finds out, well, what really happened is his mom was having an affair with Bernie, and his dad kind of took the hit and decided, like, I will, instead of destroy the family and have everyone argue and hate the mother and stuff, he decided he would just take the blame and let the kids sort of believe that, and Steven Spielberg to believe that, when in fact he didn't, maybe there were probably other aspects of their marriage, but basically, like, he took the hit and the kids didn't know really what happened. And that changed his view of fathers, because if you look at Hook or Catch Me If You Can or even Last Crusade, the views of fathers are drastically different. So we get to this movie. The Fablemans in it, you have a part where Sammy Fableman, I believe, is shooting a camping trip on his film camera. He had an editing machine, a really quaint little editing machine. He's editing together footage, and he notices his mom is close with Bernie, and he discovers the affair, and he has a secret with his mom in it, and it's like something, he's mad at his mom a lot. He has a secret with his mom. He knows it's going on, and that's a weird choice. I wasn't comfortable. You have arguments with his mom in this, and you're like, is this like, am I sitting through therapy in this? Like, and the weirdest part about this, the reason his dad made this decision was not only was to protect the family and to protect his ex-wife. Like, that was his choice. And it's sort of weird that his son makes this movie and then chooses to, like, go back on that, basically. It's like, well, they're dead, so who cares? And I'm like, I sort of get that, but at the same time, like, why change this? Because that's insanely fascinating. Like, I would actually like to see a movie just about his relationship with his father, how he thought this one thing, how it was in two of the biggest movies of all time, how there's this whole auteur theory about when he knew this and when he didn't, minus Jaws, I guess, because that father is sympathetic, but we just let that one go in our tour theory, Spielberg's father thing. It's like why take that out? And there's got to be a reason, because it is such a noticeable difference. And it's like cool. It's like a cool idea. It's like, oh, the son finds out there's filmmaking thing, and what is he going to do and stuff. And then he gives up on filmmaking, but that's not even true. Steven Spielberg didn't give up on filmmaking because his parents were divorced. He gave up on filmmaking because of Lawrence of Arabia. He saw Lawrence of Arabia and knew he could never make Lawrence of Arabia, which I would argue he never did. But I mean, he's made a lot of really good movies, but he's made a lot of movies that are better than a lot of David Lean movies too. But it's just, it's just kind of a weird choice. I was sort of okay with this movie before, and that just took me out of it because it was just like, why did you do that? Like, what's going on? And it's not the case that I find that story very fascinating. It's not like that. It's just like, that was an obvious choice. I got the impression he's sort of mad at his mom because of that he didn't get mad at her at the time, that he should have been more on his side, that he was close with her and didn't know this major part of her life, and he felt like he should have been part of that or something. I don't know. I actually would like to know, because it's just such a weird thing to do on something that was so impactful to so much of film and so much of his career. It is a weird choice to not do that. And it's saying he wants to say something about his mom. I found it kind of disappointing, because I feel like that's often like a guy's thing to do, is like blame the mom and stuff. I get in that situation why he would be mad at his mom, and like I totally understand that in this specific case, but it's just such a disappointing thing. And it's also like, if you're honoring your father by doing that, you're disappointing your father, because that's the point of what your father is fucking doing the whole time. So it's like, there's so many things about this that I find like it almost overwhelms my opinion of the film, because it's just like, why would you go back on that? And this shouldn't have been covered the way it was. It isn't very natural of a film for Steven Spielberg. He, as much as he is using his typical Norman Rockwell imagery and stuff like that, him using like the same DP he always does with John Williams, with all that, it almost like he feels too comfortable to really break out of his box. And I feel like sometimes I like The Post and I like Bridge of Spies, and when he's able to mix around with collaborators and really push himself. And in this, it felt like this was one for him. And I don't know if it's not. Sometimes the one for him, like this or Warhorse, I think, maybe they have cool shots when you think of them later, or cool moments, but I don't end up really wanting to revisit them. And I don't think they say as much as like he wanted to go into this avenue and that's what he finds fascinating. I don't think it overall says what I think he wants to do. I was kind of disappointed by this film. I thought this was going to be like a great Spielberg film sort of going in, and I was surprised by the flow of it. I was surprised by how it was written. It did feel like he was sort of just like hitting beats sometimes. Like the whole thing with his like Christian girlfriend, strange, I don't know. But that was I'd never heard much about his high school life, so a couple of people have commented. We don't really know, although the thing about his bully might be true, but a lot of it is like he's able to accomplish all this because he's such a good filmmaker, and he, things like that, which is interesting. But then the funny thing is like he takes a different filmmaking path in this than he really had, which is fascinating. How he basically like he made a film, Amblin, that was so impressive. A studio was like, no, we'll sign you as a young guy, and it was like this big thing, and he was so. And that was the other thing, is like I find the high school stuff he puts in here, like by the time we get to that, this movie's very long, and when we get there I was like, but there's like famously in this, we all know that there's going to be the John Ford scene, and I don't think that, like, it almost feels like that should be a separate movie. Like part 2 should be Spielberg on the lot up until Jaws, basically. Like the end of it could be him making Duel, and like you could make one of these every couple of years or something, if it was structured better. This could be the franchise we all needed. But in this, it just sort of goes and goes and goes, and you're like, wait, where's the scene? And the John Ford scene with David Lynch's John Ford. I do think it's hard to imagine David Lynch as a filmmaker like that, but at the same time, like, I kind of like get like he does have that kind of immediacy to the way he's talking that Ford did, and it sort of works. Like, I can't imagine anyone else playing Ford, but it's like Lynch's voice is so David Lynch that I kind of can't imagine anyone, like, it still feels like David Lynch playing John Ford. But it was cute. It is basically like word for word the scene you've heard every time. So that was like the only part of it that was like, I've heard this story before, but he nailed it, basically. It like looked like he was fine with it. But that scene like is like sort of a button. It's sort of like the end of a Marvel movie. You're like, oh no, he's going to be the studio guy in the next one or something. You could cut it out. Like, you could have ended this movie a couple scenes early, and it feels like he knows that and he doesn't care. And I don't think it's in a way that, like, Spielberg is not a formless guy, and you can absolutely tell this, and this is not working to his strengths whatsoever. And I think that's one of the major things about it. I wanted to make a movie with my kids after this. Like, it inspired me to work on movies and make smaller stuff and stuff like that. It definitely inspired me to do things like that, but it didn't. I didn't think it's a good movie. As a film, I think it's a fucking mess, and I think that's the kind of problem with it. In addition to like what it's trying to say with his own life story, I'm very confused and sort of disappointed, because I think his actual life story is like really fascinating, and I'm sort of like just disappointed he would decide to portray it in such a way and like not go into how interesting and how much that influenced in film and film culture and him in general and him as a film director and our view of divorce in the 1980s even, which I know E.T. and Close Encounters has been used for multiple times. So as someone who likes Spielberg and likes hearing about his early years and stuff like that as well, also they don't, I made a video on Firelight, and I don't necessarily need him to make something on the thing I covered or something like that, but reading about how he made films and seeing how he made films in this are vastly different. And like, what was that about? Like, some of them I'm like, that's not the film. I saw that film actually, or what I could see of that film, and that wasn't what you did in this movie. And like, why make it so much bigger? Like, what was the purpose of some of these things? That's the problem with this is like, this is not like one biography I read and I'm like needlessly nitpicking this. This is lore I've heard since I was 15 years old, and like it's been pushed and pushed and pushed. And then you make a movie of your life story and you change these things. And my biggest question is like, why? And I don't have like an answer as to why. It just feels like he is doing this to like course correct. And I get the thing about his parents' marriage, but it ultimately like made me feel kind of icky and weirded out, to be honest with you. Like, I was just like, I don't, I feel like there's probably more going on in that marriage than you knew, since you didn't even know like they got divorced. I feel like there's like bigger issues that you probably didn't know about, and like trying to pass judgment or course correct in such a way is not the greatest idea, especially in public view when we already know a different narrative. As well as like, he has 3 sisters. I could not tell you any of their fucking names, and one of them actually wrote Big, so it would have been nice. I was like at the end I was like, wait, who are they? There's like older one and younger one, and then the youngest one, they all wear glasses, I think. Like, you just totally do not, yeah. There are just a lot of things I wish I had really figured out what he was trying to say overall, had it more consistent, if it was like a well-structured kind of Spielberg autobiography. I think that would have been great. Whatever he was doing with this, like, clearly he wanted to get this out of his system. If he did and he's happy with this, then hey, Godspeed. But as a person who is interested in his lore and the legend, I think there is actually a thing they show the man who shot Liberty Valance, and the famous thing is like, you print the legend or the myth or whatever, and I feel like in this, like, that's what he was doing. I don't think he introduced that poster to say that's what maybe he did, but I found a lot of this kind of questionable and weird, especially because I liked West Side Story. I've liked him sort of recently, and I'm maybe something he needed to get out in a film we'd always heard he was going to do, and I'd always been curious and wanted him to do, but I'm sort of just disappointed in the end results. It's like, if this is how you want to portray your true story, I think the real thing we've always heard about Spielberg, he doesn't have meaning behind him. He's more of a technical filmmaker. He's more of wowing you. He wants to tell you the myth. He wants to get on the audience's side. And in this, I think this showed, to me, someone who wants the myth to be the right way that he always wants it. And it doesn't matter if he's capturing a reality. It matters more how he views it, more so than anyone else. And more so than like the truth or what would be the most interesting necessarily way to cover it. It's just how he wants it. And maybe you could say that has worked out for a lot of these films. This kind of like strict auteurism that has worked for him for the most part. And as that has gotten looser over these decades, it almost does feel like he should have done this during one of his peak periods. And this is a film that sort of just happened because it'd been sitting around for so long. And he just wants, this is how he controls the narrative now. And you kind of look at it and you're like, I don't think this will change the story. I just think it changed the story in this movie. And I guess he did that in this. But I don't know if that really gives you the peace of mind, because in the end, the truth happened, whether the legend was printed or not. So if you've seen The Fablemans and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.